Welcome back to Turn Down for What, your source for EV news and updates. Like and subscribe for more content like this episode. Let's dive on in. Welcome back to Turn Down for What? Another day. Dude,
Dang,
you're on
Chris.
mute. What a. Oh, man. Let's try that again.
Cut,
Welcome back
take
to
two.
Turn Down for What? Another day.
Another CEO type of episode.
There we go. Thank you, Chris. What a
rookie move.
absolute buzzkill. Start the episode off on mute. That is just rude and uncalled for. Today we have a good one. We're going to have a unique discussion. We want to kind of start the day. It's been now like a week and a half, 2 weeks since the big, beautiful bill passed and all of that has gone through, and really wanted to have an opening discussion around what that means for the EV charging space, what that means for EV buyers, and the whole EV space. But then also have a discussion following that, since we have the best contact for this, to also merge that discussion into what's the next steps for EV charging, where is EV charging needed the most. And so we have brought on one of the best and most wonderful sources for this knowledge, Aubrey. Thank you and welcome to Turn Down for What.
I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I'll let kind of Jesse kick off and kind of talk about the end results of the big, beautiful bill. Some of the main details that came out of that specific to the EV infrastructure, because that's pretty much what people that are going to be listening to this podcast care about. But there are several key things that was taken away and several key things that we thought might be under consideration that weren't. And so, Jesse, if you want to kind of kick us off, give us a rundown of the final outcome of the big, beautiful bill.
All right. So it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So in this case, everything for the most part was cut. Under the 30C tax credit, that's where if you have an EV charger, you would qualify if it was in a approved area. You would end up with 30% that could be utilized for a tax incentive that you would then be able to sell on the market and get back. Usually it's about 30%. So if you had up to $100,000 of install per head, that originally, I think it was to extend till 2031. As of today, that will end next year. June 30th is the date. So if you have, say, for our projects where we have large DCFC charging stations, some of that equipment will qualify as long as it's in service by next year on that date. It has to be operational to get that credit. And when it comes to if you're having an apartment complex, which I think some of you do, that system would also qualify up to $100,000 per, even if it's a level 2 charger. All the infrastructure, all of the effort that goes into creating it. So that was one thing that was a hit on us. And in the industry in general. The second part was the 45V. Now, again, this is something that's going to make somebody's eyes roll here. 45V was the tax credit for hydrogen, Chris.
Hydrogen.
So that tax credit has also been rolled back, but not as extensively. So you're looking at 2027, I believe, is the December 31st of 2027 is when that one is due. Again, there's a lot that would December 31st of 2027. Yeah, so that you have to have your projects in operation at that time, and that's also the time that we've heard that the batteries can go with. So there is a battery installation program, December 31st, 2027, kept on it. So if you have an apartment complex, once again, and you want to shield your demand charges in New York, especially is where it's huge because you're buying that power in the morning, or at nighttime it's 6 cents or 8 cents per kilowatt. You can sell it in the afternoon for 50 cents per kilowatt. That program is still in shape. So we can go up until, again, beginning of 2028. That is a 30% tax credit. You get another 10% boost if it's Buy America compliant. You get another 10% boost if you're in an energy community. All of these are online where you can find the maps and find out where you are in those. So out of everything, that is what's left over. And One thing it may do is quickly make some of these projects more valuable to get finished early. And that's kind of with Josh and I. We're looking at a lot of level 2 and DCFC deployments, and we're going to try to get them under that time period just so we can get those credits. But that's all the news from the world of the BBB that I have, Josh.
You missed one, just one. And I think it's the most important one, the most relevant one, which is the EV purchase tax credit also sunset. Now, it's nothing to do with EV chargers, but now, effective September 30th of this year, so just a mere 60 to 675, real close days away, the $7,500 tax credit for buying new EVs will disappear. And obviously, that is for a lot of EV buyers a major incentive to look at purchasing in the next 60 to 90 days. I've actually known several people that have gone out and bought EVs recently because of the new sunsetting rules. But the question becomes, we already had the discussion around the affordability of EVs, and now with the tax credit disappearing, it makes a lot of the others, traditional OEM vehicles even less competitive. And so, how does the EV OEM world, where you're making these EVs, how does that now it's even less affordable than the gas equivalent? How do those OEMs compete? Because like we've discussed, BYD has the capability to come in and be affordable if they were untariffed or minimally tariffed. And we're at a position now where the Lightning and all of these other vehicles that are approaching 80,000 are now losing almost 10% off that you were getting with that tax credit. Should it be subsidized by the government? I mean, that's its own point to discuss. But as of September 30th, if you're buying an EV, you're now looking at it. I reviewed the Model Y. We actually posted that video yesterday, and that's a $50,000 EV. But with the tax credit, you can get it for $43,000. That's a major discount on a vehicle that size, and it's the number one sell in the world. So I mean, it's like the best selling EV, and now it's going to be almost 20% more because of the loss of that tax
How
credit.
much you want to bet that there's going to be a price drop of $7,500 on a lot of EVs soon? I mean,
can the OEM support that? That's the question. I mean,
I'll be curious.
Raising it when the bill came out. So I mean,
I actually think it would be a bad look if suddenly it exactly dropped by 7,500. I think it would feed into the whole idea that it never was needed this entire time to begin with. I'd be very shocked if they suddenly cut prices that way. I mean, we'll see. I would expect other incentives to be leveraged, like low interest, things that aren't as transparent, right? Like 0% interest. It costs the manufacturers in a different way, but passes along discounts. Tesla can flex their software, which we've already seen them do, and their supercharging, which we've already seen them start to do, where, depending on what you buy, like there's a cash offer. If you buy cash, you get free supercharging for 18 months. There's certain like Model 3s, you can get 0% right now. So we're already starting to see some of that. I think they would lean more on that than a straight cut off the top.
I had to find ways to lower the cost.
Yeah, it's like not quite clear how Tesla's going to compete yet, but I mean, GM came out with their earnings report today and showed profitability was down 30%. So I think it's not just an EV issue; it's going to be a larger tariff issue on American OEMs and how American OEMs are going to stay competitive.
We're dying on the vine, and we're watching it happen in front of us. And the question is, can they adapt to figure out how to change with the technology and affordability while dealing with unions and everything else to keep affordability where they need to be? But that's a very complicated, loaded question. But on the EV sales front, that's a big hit for your ability to go sell quantity of EVs, because that tax credit was a large reason, why I was able to purchase the truck. I mean, that's a large discount on the front end. But now that disappears, the OEMs are going to have to maintain competitiveness. Like you're saying, Chris, it might be some creative ways to come around and offer different incentives and low interest rates and those kind of things to try to push those vehicles. But, in an already potentially struggling market with those expensive vehicles that you're seeing on the market, how do you get even now? It's going to be even harder to sell and maybe force either removal of some features for future models to try to get it down into more affordable ranges, or like you said, that they're gonna have to recover it through some other creative means.
I'm curious if you've seen anything yet, Aubrey, on your side with supply chain and price increases coming, because so much of this stuff that flies under the radar, Jim Farley touched on and talked about a bit, where he mentioned that he can't even get like automotive wiring harnesses made and manufactured in the U.S. So even though many components of their vehicles are made in the U.S. and a lot of them are assembled in the U.S., there's a number of things, like I know when it comes to magnets and speakers and wiper motors, all kinds of stuff that there just is zero manufacturing in the US. And I would expect it when it comes to level 2 charging, the wire harnesses in there and the ways that those things are done. Do you see any of that on your end? Or are you having to look at who and where they're manufactured? How,
Yeah.
like, are you seeing any hints of that yet?
Yeah, I think. Well, I guess one silver lining of the bill is that a lot of the battery factories are still going to go online, and that's really important from a 3 to 5 year timeline to make sure that they comply with build in America, and also the price of batteries, and to make sure that we're building a competitive battery economy here in the U.S. So I think that's that's a big silver lining, because I think everything else in the bill was unsurprising for anyone really close to the market. Like there wasn't something so huge, and I think a lot of us were a little bit scared that those were going to go away. From a supply chain aspect, I think OEMs are still trying to catch up of exactly what is the impact of tariffs, and how much it's going to change over time. So I think, and going back to GM's report today, is they're still seeing growth in the market. EVs are definitely up in their lineup, so I think we'll see. It'll be really interesting to see what we see at the end of the year. And really, we always knew that 2026 was going to be a low year, or 2025 was going to be a low year compared to 2026. Is for the amount of affordable EVs coming on the market in 2026. It's really interesting. So that just combined with the uncertainty in the market, I think is creating a lot of headlines. But at the end of the day, sales are up. There's not any indication they're going to go down. It's really it's how far up and to the right is it going to go and how fast. So
yeah. Well, I didn't do an appropriate job at the beginning of the episode, so I would like, Aubrey, if you would take a chance to introduce yourself in full and your company as a basis, and then we'll use that to kind of dive into the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So Aubrey Gunnels, CEO of 3V. We're, for all intents and purposes, investors in EV charging, specifically in the level 2 space, and specifically for, we have an offering in multifamily, and we'll be launching another offering here in hotels and public charging here soon. But we really focus on thinking of EV charging as an infrastructure investment class. We believe that there's a lot of infrastructure dollars that are going into fleet charging. There's a lot of infrastructure dollars going into level 3 charging. But at the end of the day, level 2 is where 95% of all charging happens. And really one of the key things that we're solving, especially in this first year, and we'll continue to keep solving, is around multifamily charging. So 30% of Americans live in a multifamily building. Only 5% of those buildings have chargers in them today. And 80% of charging happens at home. On the lower end. So if we think about EV adoption, we need real estate owners to put chargers on their properties. And that's really important for both the demographic of people that rent, and also that would both benefit from a cheaper commute and a total cost of ownership of a vehicle, but also that want to adopt an EV. But it's more difficult than putting in a single family home. And that is because you need the property owners to do that. And a lot of these property owners span across many states, many regions, many utilities. And that's just been a huge challenge for them to both find profitability, to find the investment, to find the people to install it. There's a lot of turbulence in the EV space coming and going in software. So we're really coming in as advisors and investors, really just focused on deploying capital.
Awesome. Yes. And so obviously that's a unique topic, but when we had spoken a couple of weeks ago, the insights between, looking at the big, beautiful bill and what that means for the EV charging space, but then also looking at the need for companies like yours, companies companies like ours to come in and, as a private sector, do some investing around promoting the EV charging space. And some of the grant programs that are for EV charging still exist. 30C still around for another year. But tell us a little bit just about your initial thoughts around what's happened in the big beautiful bill, what happened recently as far as in the EV charging space, but your vision for how that needs to roll over into the private sector.
Yeah. So one, I think that we had public dollars going into things like NEVI and CFI funding, and that was to create a marketplace for private sector to invest money in that wouldn't normally attract them. So what's really going to go away is access to EV charging in rural areas, and maybe other places that aren't on key corridors, but I'm sure at some point it will make sense to the private sector to invest there. 30 but as far as level 2 goes, and level 2 especially for multifamily buildings or affordable housing or anything that more than 10 people live in a consolidated space, either with a parking garage or even street side parking, 30C only helps so much. 30% of a project, but including prevailing wage and including the apprenticeship. The apprenticeship really guidelines were the most difficult to abide by without the price going up by 30%. And then at what point, and then you trade the credits at 80 cents on the dollar, and then it's like doesn't totally make sense unless there's a utility grant program involved. But all to say, it's a really overlooked class of EV charging investments, and especially as we see the credits going away and things of that sort, we really need to make sure that we take a step back and look as investors what makes the most sense for all parties. There used to be these like sweetheart deals that were peppered across the country, which is like, property owner, I'll pay you $50 parking spot to put in a level 2 charger at a Walgreens. Like, that economically does not make sense. There is no return on that investment. There is no reason anyone would ever be incentivized financially to maintain that charger, no matter what the contract says. So we really have to take a look at building out EV charging infrastructure as infrastructure investors, and less as like selling staff, selling units of chargers. And I think now we have to decouple the software from the hardware from the infrastructure investment. I do think there's a world that will get stacked together again at some point, but they just all react in different types of capital that we have to take a step back and really earn this wave of 2.0.
Well, one area too that Josh and I've discussed, again, I come from a telecommunications side of things and data center development, is the data. That's one missing part of this, that when Josh and I are looking at a level 2 program, for example, in North Carolina, we're thinking, okay, it's going to cost us, we might be able to make it cheaper. What people don't realize, for 4 chargers, which is 2 posts, sometimes we're looking at $50,000 to $60,000, even with very low cost equipment with 5 to 10 year warranties where I don't have to touch it. We're still looking at $60,000. The amount of charging that's needed to pay that and to pay the interest off on that usually is not even close to a positive ROI. So that's where these programs, and especially in rural areas, we have to have them. But that's where you also got to get creative and think, okay, what can I use this data for? Can I use it to know and create pathways for people to have interest and say, hey, if you're in this city, here's a screen that tells you things that can be done, and if you go there, you get benefits. There's the advertising aspect of it, and it's extremely difficult. People don't realize, even on DCFC being incentivized, say 80% like a NEVI program would be, there's areas that even at that, the 20% does not equal a profit for 12 years. So you're providing something to a community, but because power companies have demand charges and you have different situations where you have to pay a huge exorbitant amount for that power, you're just out of luck. And I think that's been one of the hardest things for Josh and I to learn, is where does it make sense to deploy? Because we want to deploy in those areas that are hard to get to between point A and point B. We want to be that middle ground, and there's no money there except for these NEVI programs or other programs out there.
And I think that's a fundamental thing that needs to be understood. And I think we've said this before, but in the realm of of public facing charging, that grant program with NEVI specifically was really there to help you fill in those middle gaps. It's not there to help you electrify Nashville and electrify Los Angeles, because the private sector can support that investment in the urban areas. And a lot of, you even see the tax credits, it didn't even apply in a lot of those urban areas because it was in not a disadvantaged community. But that's where the NEVI program wasn't designed to electrify those areas that didn't, need that investment. You've seen the private sector fill that organically. It was meant to fill in that weird rural gap between the two communities that couldn't usually afford a charger. And like Jesse's saying, even then, sometimes the 20% investment is still a relatively large risk for some of those communities. Jesse and I have seen a couple chargers that we have in our pipeline that are like, the 30C, and that helps it to where it eliminates the risk. But with everything else involved, it's a large amount of money that you have to invest into these chargers. On average, throughout this grant program, in the NEVI grant, you saw that the average request was around $600,000 to $800,000. That's a lot of money that if you freestandingly invest that into a location to try to recover organically, even in urban areas, you can't really recover that. So that's why you saw early a lot of these newer companies were introducing products that were cheaper, which now 5 years later, you're seeing reliability issues with the hardware. But a state of Florida is a very prime example of that. When they originally released their roadmap for their Florida NEVI program, and included several more sites. By the time that they're getting to, like, they almost were about to release a plan in January or this year, they had already had 2 or 3 of those sites organically fill up in the private sector, because Florida is such a prime market for EV charging, because there's a high adoption rate. It's a place that's very EV friendly for the climate and a lot of EVs in general, traveling, tourism, all those things. And so the private sector could likely fill most of Florida just because of the fact that there's such an EV dense state. But then you go into a state like Mississippi or Kentucky, Alabama, some of these states that the EV adoption's lower, and the only way to make the economics of those rural charging deployments make sense is going to be those grant programs for now until EV adoption improves. So without the grant, if the grants or the tax credits disappear, that's where the private sector, I think, is going to do a great job at filling in those use cases, like multifamily homes that have use case, and or other applications such as the urban level 2s and DCFCs and hotels and those kind of locations. But those rural communities is where I think you're going to see the largest lag if you saw any delays within the public funding infrastructure grants.
Yeah, I think it's the conundrum of EV charging as an infrastructure class. It is, one, consumer-driven returns is not how infrastructure works. So it, really trying to get strong utilization forecasts is always going to be a challenge. And then you have to get investors comfortable with that, because there's no PPAs or equivalent in EV charging, especially in this type of class. And then number 2 is, because it is consumer-driven returns, it's a new asset class. Standard infrastructure returns is no longer eligible. So it's sitting somewhere between. It's not a SaaS return where it's like 100x, but it certainly has to be higher than 20% IRR. Otherwise, you're taking too heavy of a risk. So it's a weird infrastructure class. And then even I'll also add for ad revenue is getting an infrastructure investor into MarTech. So understanding marketing ad cash flows, and then modeling on a 12-year horizon to get infrastructure dollars and take it to the bank is almost impossible. I have found very few, like Volta, for instance, went to Shell, so they could get comfortable, but no traditional bank could. So I think we'll continue to see creativity in it, but still matching capital stacks to investors. And then to the product continues to be, I think, one of the biggest issues in deploying capital in the space.
So as somebody that, go ahead, Jesse. As somebody that doesn't have the entrepreneurial background and doesn't have a cool C-suite title, I'm going to work on that with Josh. I'm going to get some kind of fancy title for me.
Chief Podcasting Officer, CPO.
Yes, awesome, love it. I guess naively, when I think of level 2, I think of like companies that deploy it, municipalities that deploy it, hotels, and like big complexes, HOAs, and places that are using it that don't necessarily, expect to get an ROI the way you would traditionally get something, but more see it as the way you would maintain your property to make it more attractive, or your job to be more attractive, or to be an amenity, right? The same way you wouldn't get it necessarily a direct ROI on a swimming pool or a hot tub. Am I totally naive on that? And you guys are like, oh, that's adorable, man. No, that's not how it works.
Such a range. It's a funny question. I mean, yeah, it's really interesting. It's a range of who we talk to. One, the like pools, I'm sure that there is a like pre-described like ROI on where to put a pool and where not to. That's because pools have been around, for as long as lakes have. I don't know. For charging, because you are also selling something, like you risk demand charges. So I would say like they are interested in that. Number two is if you are a real estate owner, you are an investor. So you want to return. Like it's just their natural piece, like their natural intention there. So it's their immediate reaction in most cases, like, what's in it for me? And they need some sort of proof point of why it would drive. I'll speak specifically to hotels. Drive occupancy or drive a return on that. It's definitely not just to like create a great EV charging amenity to like drive the adoption. It is definitely like trying to convert those two things. So we're also coming off a tail of people offering sweetheart deals. So they're like, actually, you pay me, and like that sounds better. It's like, yeah, one, no shit, but two, also like that deal. No one's ever going to cut that deal ever again, like especially the next 5 years. So I think it's educating people in the market that no longer exists. Like it is something that they have to pay for. And then it's getting their attention to pay for it has also been interesting. And then the last thing I'll say is people that have done it have huge headaches, even if they've done it one or two. Say you own 50 properties and you've done EV charging at about 5 of them. You are such a headache from like having to like replace your juice boxes or trying to like get charge points customer service on the phone. Granted, it's gotten a lot better, but like you are so scarred by the entire experience that you want someone to come in and take it all over, or you want someone or you just don't want to deal with it quite yet because you're not quite sure and there's not enough pressing pieces to it. So I would say whenever I get on podcasts or whatever, like my advice to anyone is like, please tell your landlord, please tell any hotel that like you wish they had charging so that way they can hear it. Cause like it does trickle down to property owners, or trickle up, I guess. But it's definitely not. It also, yeah. So for those reasons, it's very slow in the market to move quickly and deploying there.
Is there any trusted industry data that points to hotels or properties where there is a correlation? I've heard that where Tesla puts in their superchargers, those businesses and those strip malls or those areas that had almost been on the decline suddenly see a bump. But I don't know that I've seen like trusted industry data on that. Is that floating around out there? Is there a place that's doing that type of research?
I wish. I would say I just looked at, we had a hotel chain give us about 70 sites worth of data over the last 4 years of utilization data, which was great, really interesting. The variance was so wild. Like the top 10% of sites will definitely break profitability in the next 3 years. The bottom sites will break even in the next 20. Like it's hard to say like what hotels are very, very hard to underwrite so I guess our hotel model will be a hotel. You pay me X amount of money per charger for the next number of years, and I will make sure they're always up. You can keep all of the revenue. Like we can advise on pricing, but like you pay as a service for the infrastructure. And that's just because it's almost impossible to underwrite the usage. But for multifamily, we offer a no CapEx, no OpEx. And that's because we can do localized penetration in those areas. So say you have a 400 unit building, I can say with enough confidence that 10% of that building will be EV by whatever X date, depending on the locality, and basically say like, this is the demand and we will get our money back within this, etc. But hotels are so hard, like to tell. Co-locating against Tesla is interesting. But yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see.
charging data, Tesla just performs different than everybody else, just because they have such a large market share and they can push their own chargers. And so even on the DCFC front, like you can't utilize any Tesla analytics to make anything make sense, because Tesla just is going to have, in general, better analytics than any other competitor, because they have the lion's share of the EV market, and because their infrastructure has been so notoriously reliable and pretty standardized for those vehicles. A lot of those drivers won't variate from their network, and so it's pretty consistent across the board that you see those utilization numbers be pretty strong. But also the utilization is a little bit different because they also do deployments of 16 at a time versus a lot of the other people doing 4. And so there's, you see lots of sessions, but there's also lots of chargers, and so that does affect the utilization numbers.
Even their universal wall connectors, though, man, they're so good because you can do both. You know, the NAX and the J1772 out of one unit. They can power share across multiple stalls. You know, they're pretty resilient. They hold up well in the outdoors. They're really well engineered, but the cost to entry on those universal wall connectors are more expensive than some of those other ones that go out there. But you know they're going to be there. They're not going to disappear. It's funny you mentioned Juicebox, because that had horrible ramifications for my 9 to 5 business. We had one on our property, and it so freaked out the C-suite people, like what we went through with that it has since been like locked down. The circuit breaker's been turned off. They don't even want to get it replaced. And the e-transit that I had was just recently sold off. They were just like, the hassle of it, kind of to your point, when they're not in that business, right? When their focus, their expertise, you know, in my case is in transportation and logistics, they don't want to be in the charger business. And we've been burned now twice, you know, once by all of the juice box equipment that we had, and then before that, Shell Recharge, that we had a number of chargers at some of our yards, and then they went out of the business, I guess. And so as far as for fleets, and then, you know, we had to come up and work with them and figure out how to buy their equipment and service the equipment on our own and all this other stuff. And that's not the business we want to be in. And so if you're a large apartment complex, or if you're a large business whose focus is elsewhere, it kind of needs to be that turnkey solution that's easy enough to facilitate and operate and adds value to your customer. I hope they start collecting data on this stuff, because I'd love to see if does the average renter or leaser of a multi-unit property stay longer if they're an EV owner and that charging is on site, because the hassle of trying to find another property, because we know that charging at home is such a big value, right? Or to your point, it's interesting that you find that some hotels very clearly are, you know, getting their return on investment 10x faster than others. What's the correlation there? Is it a population density? Is it, you know, places? Does it correlate to where EVs sell well? California, for example, is different than, Mississippi. Man, it'd just be great to hopefully these numbers start to really show in a way that can make some meaningful progress.
Yeah, we've been trying to find comps in Europe, just because they're obviously more mature, and so that way we can at least see like some indication of, you know, consumer habits, because I tell my investors this too, that like it's going to take a year or two for us to even derive data that we should invest off of. Otherwise, it's a guess. It's a wild guess. But you know, I think it's really important. One, the last thing we want is a building to have bad reviews from EV charging, and that's really where they start to care a lot if it's not working. And we did a huge RFI back in last fall, and continue to analyze different companies. And that is because the software and the reliability and the ability for these software providers to exist over the next 5 years is really, really critical to make sure that we are providing the best resident experience, or visitor experience, and also making sure that they will be around without having to pay to re-network them. We also take very seriously the ability for those chargers to be re-networked. So we ask for letters of proof that someone has re-networked their chargers, whether it's, you know, a Zeroka or a LiDAR or whatever it is, to show that if anything would ever happen to that software, that at least like it's not disrupting the entire investment, yes, it will cost money to go re-network them, but it's de-risking at least the larger piece to it.
So when you kind of to that point, when you look at the equipment, or I don't even know if you guys specifically are close enough to it that you're specifying equipment, but are you looking for that stuff that has OCPI so that you have a better shot at being able to not get stuck in that, kind of bespoke problem if something were to happen?
Yeah, we also said for the place of privilege that we're like, we can use, like, why use anything other than the most A+ that we can find, like, companies in the market. So yeah, we think that's really important. We also care a lot about the networking equipment and the robustness and testing that's gone into, like, the telecom piece that's like very overlooked in the space. Because if it keeps going on and offline, then no one can charge, and I don't make any money. Or I don't make my investors back their money, let's put it that way. So that's all, like, super important. But another interesting piece to this is that, as it relates to taxes, or more of the government side, is the ADA requirements and the different county requirements at the local. I'm sure you guys are more than familiar. It's just like a frustrating piece of the puzzle that's to comply, or the rules just aren't set out clearly. So it's kind of a guess of whether who the permitting office is and how they feel that day, whether they're going to require certain types of striping and things like that. So I think that also really gets in the way of moving quicker, because we have to do so many turns of the engineering drawings. Because, like, one time they decide that they care about, bollards versus, like, tire stops or whatever it is. Florida specifically, I think, is kind of typical in that realm, and then of course California. But
it's just one of those things that I think the theme is the EV charging space is still such a baby that there's so much unknown that we're dealing with. And, we've dealt with it, especially on the DCFC front, is, the power companies don't know how to respond to DC fast charging. And some of them have good policies, some of them don't, because they're just not used to that model. But also when it comes to infrastructure, software, all of these things, you're seeing so much, a lot of people trying to enter the market and produce these products and white label these products and do all of these crazy things, but you have to maintain a certain level of uniformity, but also versatility at the same time, to give you that function of functionality, reliability, but also, should the waves of different business come and go, like you said, there needs to be that distinction between hardware, between software, because those things can change. But as long as you have reliability on one front, you can change the other and have the ability to maintain that versatility. But that's where the EV charging space is so new, that you're seeing some entries come in now that are really good, that weren't here 2 years ago, but also some that have been here for 5 years that are getting better. And that's just where it's a product of time. Even companies, large companies like Electrify America on a DCFC front, their early offerings had a really poor reliability offering, just as national sentiment goes. I had bad experiences. Chris had bad experiences. But more recently, their newer chargers, I have had a lot better success with, because I think that they've improved their infrastructure. They have matured as a company, because they weren't an early leader producing, foreign made units that weren't reliable. Now they're making and producing their own units, and they're able to control some of those user experience pieces more. And so they, I think in general, are improving in sentiment. Maybe in the overutilized areas like San Francisco, Chris will still avoid them at all costs. But in general, for me, like I've noticed in the last 5 years, they've really matured as a company. I think that they're getting a lot more reliability on average than others. But that's where it's just a matter of each company's having to figure out those metrics on who's the hardware, who's the software that's going to provide the best user experience, and then being able to be adaptable around that as times change and as technology improves.
Yeah, their San Francisco one is really nice that they made. It's got like 20 of them indoors. They did a great job of maintaining that. The ones that I experienced coming out from your area, Josh, Tennessee, all the way out here, only had one bad experience. So they've definitely improved quite a bit, although I will still tend to avoid them. Just, PTSD or whatever scarring that is, and then just the math on it, right? Like when most of them only have 4 four chargers, and there's a chance that one might be down to begin with, and you go to a Tesla one, and there's 12 or 40 or 80, like some of them are out here in California. It's just you're just playing the odds at that point.
Yeah, especially with
And that's
high EV
the hard part.
utilization.
Yeah, it's like if you want to, like, if I'm gonna, pitch to a hotel and say like we'd love to, build chargers at your property. Billable power is probably for 4 chargers, like probably load sharing 6. Like we recommend, like that's probably the case, and they're like, great, can we just do 2? Then they're like, you're signing up for a hotel that might or might not have an available charger, because it starts to get into like, are you going to nudge people off a charger in the middle of their hotel stay in order to circle cars and things like that? That really comes down to like a hotel decision.
I think the biggest thing with those properties for me as an EV owner with hotels and multi-unit is their willingness to enforce that is an EV spot. And so often we pull up and there's Josh experienced this recently where he pulls up and there's an ICE vehicle parked there, and they're using, there's only so many spots, one is down and then 2 are occupied, and the owner has to be willing to tow those vehicles and get them responded to, or again that becomes unreliable. And a lot of people, like for myself, when I travel, I'm looking at hotel reviews and I'm filtering by who has EV charging at their property, and then I'm looking at PlugShare and I'm looking to see, are they showing that they're actually up and operating? Are they showing that they're frequently blocked by other vehicles and not enforced? And so those are, again, just more layers that on one hand, a lot of property owners, man, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that conversation. I'd have to track, what room number has that vehicle. Some do and some don't. Just because they track them doesn't even mean that all their occupants register their vehicles. It's a whole nother administrative task that's not, again, the business that they're in. So there's such a balance there of experience and what that puts on, the burden that puts on the operator as well. So
yeah, it's like somewhere between, do you want your property to be competitive? So like if you have chargers and the 10 other apartment buildings around you don't, then like that makes the case for your, it can go up, but then also, yeah, it's more complaints potentially. And I think obviously idle fees are one way to do it, but if you unplug your car, or like no one's going to move their car at 2 a.m. or no one should move their car at 2 a.m. So we also, for our multifamily side, we very much we model 30% utilization as we max out our models there to make sure that we provide the best resident experience.
Yeah, just calling them out straight up. This is the definition of an ice hole. You know what I mean? An ice hole. What a loser. But yeah, we pulled up to this Buc-ee's that was insanely busy, like crazy busy. And the reason they parked here was because there was no other parking spaces, because the Buc-ee's was insane. This is Kentucky, by the way. But I was pulling up to charge and there was no available charger because they had blocked the chargers with their vehicles. And that's just, it's a matter of the same concept of going to a gas pump and just parking there and going inside the Buc-ee's. I mean, you're just blocking traffic at that point in time. But I had to wait for one, got to plugged into one. It was the only time I've ever had a negative experience with one of these Mercedes charge points units.
How was the Mercedes charger?
It in general has been fine. Like I've used the Mercedes charge point a lot in Crossville Buc-ee's because that's a common path between our office and Nashville, where we're headed to our corporate office. And I'd take that road trip, and that charger has always been great. But this one, there was so much utilization. There was a Hummer, a GMC EV. It was a Hummer, a Silverado, Rivian, and a Porsche Taycan, all plugged in at the same time. And I don't think that the infrastructure was ready for that many 800-volt architecture vehicles, because I plugged up and I was getting like 80 kilowatts. And I was like, man, this is, but it literally said grid limited on the charger. So I think it was just a matter of, there was so many high-powered vehicles showing up at one time that it was just a fluke experience.
I love vehicles. We can tell on our data when you see like a Hummer lives in a multifamily building, just because,
makes everybody happy. I wish every charger could have a Hummer nearby. The Silverado, the Hummer, those 250 kilowatt, 250 kilowatt battery packs. It's beautiful for EV charging. We all love that.
Not efficient at all.
That's a beautiful thing. With less efficiency, you give them more kilowatts. But anyways, the charge experience as a whole, don't be an ice hole. get out of the EV charging spaces. But no, I mean, for real, in this situation, what are you supposed to do? I mean, like, technically you have the right to be towed because you're parked in a EV charging space. I don't know the exact rules behind that, but I mean, that's you are directly blocking. But I had to wait for those people to leave before I could stop and charge, which was an extra like 20 minutes at the stop because there was all the other EV chargers were full. So it's a consideration as far as if you are a gas vehicle driver, don't block an EV charger.
Well, I think in that case, one of the things that popped right out at me that was missing is, and again, this is another expense to property owners and to maintain over time, is when you take your parking spots and you give them that big green paint on the ground that really emphasizes that this is EV parking only, and then usually some signage also that points to that and warns that it could be towed. So that's again just another layer. But yeah, if it just
sense. And that's like the
yeah.
ROI of like, oh, like do we or do we not, like bollards, for instance, are like great to protect the charger, but also like, is it worth the extra $4,000 or whatever it is?
Yeah.
And yeah, the paint is also, and then it's like, oh, can we make it not green, or what if it's smaller, and type of aesthetic conversations.
But a lot of times with the federal grants and stuff, there's requirements for all of that. Like you have to have all of those things in place, which we're dealing with our sites.
Like the
but
ramp, and yeah, for like ADA ramps and things like that too.
Yeah, the other issue that we had at this charger was the Silverado was pulling a trailer. And so they had to angle in, and actually they blocked a charger. They were the last one, but they tried to like whip it in, but they blocked a charger themselves because they couldn't it was a Silverado, the charger's on the back. And so they couldn't do anything. There's nowhere to put the load because all the parking spaces were full. So they had to like kind of whip in sideways because there was no pull through chargers there. Just another conundrum of EV charging that needs to be resolved. But that's just the uniqueness of the charging experience. It's just so diverse.
We've seen in multifamily, people are more inclined to treat it like their maybe not personal property, but certainly with more kindness. Just as you will see your neighbors and don't want to be shamed as much. So the O&M is a little bit lower for multifamily compared to any public charger driven hotels.
Less likely to get your cables cut, hopefully.
Fingers crossed.
All right. Well, what do you think is the next step for the private sector in the EV charging space? Obviously, you're seeing your company is doing investing in multifamily, but what is the role of the private sector ongoing?
I mean, we need to definitely deploy more cash. I think it's an interesting, sustainable infrastructure as a whole is going through a shift right now. There's certainly many funds that have allocated dollars to deploy in the next 4 years to sustainable infrastructure projects, but they need to get really smart on utilization and get past headlines of whether EVs are going to happen or not. Like we all know that that's not true, and so it's really them spending time on understanding consumer-driven risk and understanding things about the EV charging space. I would say, a lot of private flock to fleet, and I think that if we can get other people to deploy dollars is the only way we're going to build this faster and do more of it. And it obviously is a much larger role than it's ever been. I think utility programs will continue their subsidies just because it was always on a mission to make sure that they were building responsibly and also to make sure that they could support the new load. And then I think the saving grace and sustainable infrastructure will be data centers in order to bring enough capacity to really help enable the grid dynamics. But it is the time for the private sector to get involved, and they have plenty of dollars that aren't going to solar and wind now, so they should read up on EV charging.
Yeah, I mean the utility is a really true angle because the largest people to gain in the situation of data centers and EV charging is the utility company. They get to sell more power, and yes, it might require them to upgrade their infrastructure, but if it's a constant demand, especially data centers, I mean it's a constant demand for high levels of power, and they can sell and make lots more energy dollars off of that. The utility companies you've seen them have programs where they're supporting and providing the back end infrastructure for these data centers and for the charging infrastructures, because it's an economic model. And so I think that's outside of federal government grants, utility subsidies is one of the largest opportunities to help push infrastructure developments forward in the lesser prone areas and the harder to get areas, because that a lot of times they're willing to cover several bits of the expenses on the back end, or help you with getting some of the lines run or the transformer dropped, and those kind of things, especially on the big DCFC front, makes a big difference on the cost parameters, because running a line a mile down the street can be very, very expensive. But if they have the right utilization and the use case, then a lot of times they're willing to do that and even provide transformer and beyond, just because of the opportunity they have to sell you power. And so having those type of partnerships with the right contacts in your area really do help, I think, as an incentive to help lower the overall risk and the capital required to get a deployment on the ground.
Yeah. And then to that also challenge any financial modeler and any data person to, find ways to invest in this space without subsidies. And like, it is possible. It just, requires sharpening pencils and making assumptions and finding investors that are willing to really crack open the math to get comfortable with it.
And we've seen that. I mean, a lot of banks and financial institutions and, just in general, that whole side of things, it's a different dynamic. It's a different, even just with the grants and the tax credits. I mean, it's a very complex system outside of a traditional investment where you're investing in the gas station buildings, and making pretty much a guaranteed straight line revenue. The EV charging space, going back to my last point, was it's such a baby. Like, there's not a lot of data to back up those investing choices. And so you have to have either good faith with the investing party, or you have to have a really solid buttoned up business plan to be able to propose, because there is a lot of unknown with the EV charging space. Like you're saying, you can pull data from 100 hotels, and the data is so far, like, how do you make a straight line, pitch to a bank or to otherwise to say, hey, look, this is a good investment, because the data is all over the place. And because it's so new, and because EV adoption is improving, like, we're just at that growing pain stage where we're trying to figure out the best way to make the economic models make sense for investors and for the cash entities that are going to help supply the back end infrastructure for these projects.
We're in the fun stage. We get to learn from everything in wave 1, and we get to go and build, wave 2 with all of the insights that we have from wave 1. So.
I do think that the next 5 years will produce more infrastructure than we've seen in the last 15, because we're at that point of the industry. It's just one of those things that we are still right at that beginning of that curve. It's been slow, but then we're about to hit that acceleration curve, and it's just, we have to begin to learn through the mistakes of the past, but also go through the growing pains of the rapid acceleration of deployments that we're going to see in the next 5 years, because I do think that we're going to see a tremendous explosion in opportunities, and that will help promote the charging, the vehicle sales themselves, which will then help use more chargers, and it'll go back and forth and push that industry forward.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Aubrey, for coming on and having this discussion. It's been a pleasure having you. Just a lot of good insight and a lot of good data to glean, and obviously excited to see what you're doing with 3V in the infrastructure space for multifamily. If somebody happens to be listening and they are multifamily owner or property owner, and they want to look at partnering on a level 2 deployment, how would they get a hold of your company?
3vinfrastructure.com. We have an intake form somewhere on the website. I believe it's at the bottom.
Somewhere at the website, yeah.
And if not, it's definitely at the top. And that is fill that out. And yeah, even here to geek out on all things EV charging investments and capital deployment. That's our main bread and butter. So.
Awesome. Well, definitely check out 3vinfrastructure.com. Check out everything that they're doing, and a lot of positive movement happening in the level 2 space, specifically multifamily and otherwise. But yeah, good conversation. That'll be all for this week. We'll continue onwards. We'll have you back on at some point to talk about the stuff that you're doing and some of the progress that's been made, and an update on kind of how everything's boiled down from this point onwards. But yeah, any final thoughts that you want to share with everybody?
tell any landowner that that you want an EV charger at their property, so they can so it can trickle down.
Yeah, we've seen requests come in from all over the nation, Maine to Washington State. I mean, they're all over the place that they want it. It's just a matter of finding the right party that's willing to do the deployment, and companies like 3V are going to be a great asset to do some of those deployments in those areas that need it.
Yeah.
So. All righty. Well, thank you for tuning in today. Like and subscribe if you don't to Turn Down for What. Like I said, on the YouTube channel, we just posted a review of the Tesla Model Y refresh. We do some extra content on YouTube. But if you're listening to us on Spotify or one of those platforms, thank you for being a consistent listener. And I'll keep tuned for more EV news and updates. We got the weekly live on Thursday nights where we're meeting we have Jace and Chris and Martin that kind of do some more technical talks, live streamed 2 hours usually, and it's just a great opportunity to ask questions and get answers. And then we try weekly to do a podcast like this where just general updates, news, and kind of pushing that industry forward. But then on the YouTube channels and some of the video platforms, we can do some more reviews and other content for some of the other things that Jesse and I are doing for Power Up, but also that Chris gets involved in. And so tune into all of those just so you can stay in track with all those. But for now, that is all for this episode of Turn Down for What. Tune in next week for more EV news and updates. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to Turn Down for What. Make sure you're subscribed with your notifications on to tune in to more EV news and updates. See you next time.